And we're now live, Chair.
Right, thank you, Sophie. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to this evening's meeting of Place Scrutiny panel on 20th of October 2022. We have a fairly interesting lineup this evening as far as the agenda is concerned, but to go through the agenda, do we have any substitutes nominated for this meeting and any apologies for absence?
No, Chair. We've no substitutes and no apologies.
I would like to offer an apology for probable lateness from Councillor Peter Caffrey, who's hoping to join us later during the course of the meeting. Right, members' interests. I do need to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they may have in relation to the items included on the agenda, which may be declared later on or now as you see fit. So no one offering anything at this point, that's fine. And if I can then say that's we do have admission of the public from a viewing capacity, rather than being able to engage more directly. So on to item 4 on the agenda, the minutes of the Place Scrutiny Board meetings held on the 18th and the 25th to be agreed as a correct record and, well, not signed by me on this occasion, but do we have anyone willing to propose those minutes as an accurate record and anyone to second? Okay, Sue Holdsworth was the first person I saw, so I'm going to take her as a nomination, and Councillor Smith as a second, and everyone agreed? Anyone? Yes, thank you, Councillor Young, and no one against. Okay, just in terms of housekeeping, when it comes down to engaging and wanting to offer comments or ask questions, if you are able to use the use the hands up icon on the reactions button, because it does bring you to the top left hand corner of my screen, so I can see you in the correct order and invite you to speak as appropriate. We are now leading on very nicely to our first item on the agenda in terms of for our consideration, the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller Communities report, to be presented, I presume, by the Director of Public Health, which I believe is Deborah Harkins. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, Chair. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this with some interest.
Thank you. And we've got a presentation that we will share. I'll share my screen shortly, but I just wanted, Chair, just before we begin this item, I'm delighted we've got Ellie from the Leeds Gate organisation with us today, so that we can have a perspective from our Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community. And it was important, I think, to remind everybody before we move into the conversation that Gypsy, Roma, Traveller ethnicity is a protected characteristic under the equality law. So it's really important that we remember that as we have this conversation. I'm gonna just very briefly share some slides, and then I'm going to invite Ellie to come in before we move on to the rest of the presentation. But I just wanted to, in fact, I won't even put the slides up. I'll invite Ellie in first, but just to say what we're going to do in this session, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hear from our Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community in West Yorkshire. We're then going to share some of the data really around inequalities experienced by Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities. We're going to say a little bit about the action that we're working with the community to take through our Gypsy and Traveller plan on a page that we've shared with you with the papers. Richard is with us, and we will talk a little bit about Traveller sites, and then finally about supporting the health, wellbeing and education of Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities as well. So I'll if it's okay, I'll invite Ellie to come in first of all, and then we'll move into the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, that sounds fine.
Thank you, Deborah. Hi, everybody. My name's Ellie Rogers and I'm the CEO of an organisation called Leeds Gypsy and Traveller Exchange. And despite that name, we do actually work across West Yorkshire. So that's the reason I'm here with you today. We're hoping to support Calderdale Council's work with the Gypsy and Traveller communities of Calderdale. So at Leedsgate, we're a registered charity and we've been running for 19 years and we do a number of things to support gypsies and travellers, including sort of practical services such as advocacy and support work, mental health support work, and a number of community development activities, including youth work and educational activities such as the Homework Club. And we also work strategically across the region to try and improve things for our membership. So anybody that comes to Leedsgate becomes a member of our organisation, and we've got over 800 gypsies and travellers who live across West Yorkshire as our membership registered with us at the moment. So I haven't prepared a presentation or anything. I'm hoping to just be here in sort of support of what Deborah's got to say and to answer any of your questions as we move through the agenda. I really echo what Deborah said about, we're talking about an ethnic minority here, so we need to be respectful, but also I know that a lot of what people imagine in their minds maybe about gypsies and travellers is unauthorised encampment. And as local elected members, I imagine that's what a lot of your experience of gypsies and travellers is. An encampment enters a local area and you have to deal with it alongside your local authority colleagues. But gypsies and travellers are a lot more than unauthorised encampments. They are people that belong to different ethnic minorities, including Romani gypsies, Irish travellers and Roma people. And those are different separate ethnic minorities that share, long cultures and histories. They all have their own language, particular crafts and traditions. So we're not just talking about people that live in caravans. We're talking about a different ethnic minorities that have a long history in the UK, dating back, over 1,000 years. Gypsies and Travellers have been with us here in the UK. It's probably worth saying as well that I don't think any of us at this point in time know a huge amount about the Gypsy and Traveller communities in Calderdale. We do know some gypsies and travellers in Calderdale, and we have done a little bit of work for Calderdale Council in the past where we've spoken to about 30 families about their situations. But I think it's an area of work that really does need, developing and exploring from all of our perspectives. I think I'll leave it there for now, but as I say, I'm with you for the whole meeting, so I'm really happy to chip in at any point you think it would be useful for me to, and obviously to answer any questions that you've got.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ellie. We really, really appreciate you joining us today. And just as well, Chair, just so you're aware that as well as myself and Ellie, we've also got Oliver Crossland here and Richard Seaman as well for this item, just so you're aware, because there's a number of elements that we wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to now have a go at sharing my screen. Oh, it says I can't share my screen. So I don't know, Sheila, I think, are you the host? If I send you this presentation, is that right?
Sophie's the host, if she's
Sophie.
still here.
No, Sophie's now gone.
Right.
It's myself. You can send it to any officer, I think, and they would be able to upload it, but it's entirely up to you.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just go through it. We'll just talk through it without it being on screen. It's not allowing me, and I'm conscious we've started the meeting late anyway because of technological issues. So we'll just we'll just talk. I'll just talk through it. You've got a copy of the presentation anyway, in the packs. So the first thing that we wanted to just really highlight is some of the inequalities experienced by Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities, and particularly from a health inequalities perspective, which is why you've got myself talking to you really today. So we know that it does appear that life expectancy in the traveller community is 10 to 12 years less than that of the non-traveller population. So, you know, people that are travellers can expect to live significantly shorter lives than people that aren't travellers. And about 42% of English gypsies are affected by a long-term health condition, compared to just 18% of the general population. So almost half of English gypsies have got a long-term health condition. And it's absolutely devastating, I think, that 1 in 5 Gypsy, Roma and traveller mothers will experience the loss of a child, compared to 1 in 100 in the non-traveller community. And travellers are nearly 3 times more likely to be anxious than average, and just over twice as likely to be depressed. So mental health as well as physical health inequalities experienced by the community. And suicide is 7 times higher for young Gypsy Roma traveller men compared to, age 15 to 25. So young traveller men are significantly more likely to take their own lives. An uptake of a number of the things that opportunities that we've got to prevent ill health, such as screening, vaccinations. Again, we know that is lower in the community, the traveller community, than the non-traveller population. So we know, for example, that the Gypsy Roma traveller ethnic group, broad ethnic category, when we look at data on the uptake of the COVID vaccine, it was the lowest of any ethnic group. I've just had a message as well pop in, sorry, Janet, just to say that Heidi's with us as well. And
right,
if we could admit Heidi for this item, that'd be brilliant. Thanks, Janet. So really significant health inequalities and worrying health inequalities. We know as well, I think, that the reason for these health inequalities is because of the living conditions and the discrimination that the Gypsy and traveller community face. So we know that there's an increased likelihood of unhealthy living conditions, things like limited access to clean water and electricity, insecure accommodation, poor air quality and noise because of the living conditions. We also know the educational attainment of the Gypsy and traveller community is lower than other is lower than other ethnic groups. So 60% of the Gypsy and traveller population have no qualifications. That's the highest of any ethnic group, and almost 3 times higher for the average, which is 23%. And also we know that the economic activity is lower in the Gypsy and traveller community as well. And we also know that the Gypsy and Roma community, Gypsy Roma traveller communities are much more likely to be informal carers of family members, and again the highest of any ethnic group. So 42% of people are informal carers of family members. So higher health inequalities. The root causes of those health inequalities caused by sort of living and working conditions, and more likely to be caring for unwell family members, and in significant experience of living with discrimination, racism and harassment. And we know that there can be poor access to health services as well. We know that that's for a range of reasons, but including fear of discrimination, difficulties registering, and that health professionals can often lack the skills, support and cultural understanding of Gypsy and traveller communities. And it's really because of this that we've developed a Gypsy, Roma and traveller plan. We really want to tackle those inequalities that are experienced by our communities. So what we've shared with you in the pack is a plan on a page that we've put together. Quite a few of the people, the officers on the call, but also we've shared this with and discussed this with our colleagues at Leeds Gate as well. So you can see that on that plan in a page that we've identified 5 objectives in that plan. So you can see the overall goal is we want to reduce those inequalities that are experienced by our Gypsy and Traveller communities who live in Calderdale and who visit Calderdale. And those 5 objectives are, we really want to know more about, as Ellie said, the strengths and needs of Calderdale's Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community. So we really want to know more about the experiences, the strengths, the contribution to our community, and the needs of the community. We want to we want to develop a traveller site in Calderdale or sites, and explore the implementation of something called negotiated stop-in, which is where we identify sites in Calderdale where stopping can be tolerated, and then what we do there is negotiate and work with the local community and the traveller community to talk about the sort of the rules of the game and the ground rules, if you like, in relation to stopping. We also, the third objective is to ensure that we have effective enforcement and response to illegal traveller encampments. That we engage, the fourth one, is that we engage with gypsies and travellers encamped in the borough to identify the health and wellbeing and education support that they need. And finally, to undertake, I've mentioned already, our statutory responsibilities under the Equality Act. And I hope you can see, and I'd be really keen to get your thoughts and your comments on that plan on a page. So I'm going to hand over now to Richard, who's just going to say a little bit about Gypsy and Traveller sites, if that's okay.
Deborah, could I just come in and just do a quick explanation of where Gypsies and Travellers live, especially because we're just about to talk about sites, so it might just help, because I know these terms can be a bit confusing, and when we're saying sites and camps, what do we mean? So there are a number of authorised sites where gypsies and travellers can stay on a permanent basis in the country, run by either private individuals, housing associations or local authorities. So some of that, as it were, is social housing. So you might think of it as the Gypsy Traveller equivalent of council housing, and some of it's like privately run. So either privately owned by families that live there, or privately run and rented. So you might think of that as the same as like the private rented sector. So those are places where people stay for most of the year. They're living in caravans, trailers that move around, or in more like static caravan homes on those sites, and will be resident there for like most of the year, or for like when they go on holiday. And then we've also got 2/3 of gypsies and travellers that actually live in housing. So the majority of people that identify with those different ethnic groups that we're including in that phrase actually do live in houses. And part of that is because there is this historic lack of provision for people to live in their caravans, either in travelling around or on those authorised sites. And as you know, you don't actually have an authorised like social housing local authority site in Calderdale at the moment. And in terms of people that are moving around, which is the people that you might have seen more of, be more familiar with, those people are stopping on unauthorised encampments. So they're not actually illegal, they're unauthorised, which means that they don't have permission to be there. But those people, like, they own their caravans, but they don't have anywhere like to legally put them. So they're actually statutory homeless as well. So you can think of them as a homeless population, where they don't have anywhere that they can legally put their caravan. And some recent statistics showed that we've got about 3,000 families nationally that are in that position. So they're moving around in their caravans and have nowhere that they can like legally stop for any length of time. So when we get people that are on roadside encampments, often they are homeless and they don't have anywhere to legally stop, and they're being moved on by enforcement activities from local authorities. So they might have, I don't know, come from Manchester, then be in Calderdale, then come over to Leeds. So they're travelling around and being moved on as they go along. So what Deborah mentioned, the negotiated stop-in, is a scheme that we came up with in Leeds to try and have better outcomes for gypsies and travellers, and also save money on eviction and enforcement. So the idea is that you work with people rather than only having an approach which is enforcement. You have an approach where you go out and you have a discussion and a dialogue, and you see, can we engage with these people? Is it appropriate that they might be able to stop for a little bit longer? And actually a lot of a lot of the thinking around negotiated stopping, it's not new, it's actually really old. It's things that gypsies and travellers have been doing for centuries. Used to negotiate a lot with landowners, be seasonal workers, would pull up on farms and work for the summer, and then have an agreement with landowners that they could stop. So this kind of arrangements and agreements that have been happening between the gypsy traveller community and the settled community for centuries. And I think one of the things that's actually really impacted the gypsy traveller community is like urban growth and the competition for land, especially in more urban areas. So a lot of those arrangements and agreements that were tolerated in the past, because there's such competition for land now, have become less tenable. So yeah, we've got those families that are travelling around, a large proportion of which are homeless, and some of them are choosing to live like that, choosing to live nomadically. So even if you offered them a permanent place on the site, they might say no, because actually they have always moved around. That's always what them and their family have done. They've never settled in one place, and they want to carry on doing that. And then you've also got people that are traveling in and out for like really short periods of time. So people might be coming because there's a funeral, or might be coming because there's a wedding or a christening, and they only want to stay for a few days, and then they'll be off again. So people are there for a number of different reasons, but I would say the majority of families that we work with who are living on those unauthorised encampments are homeless. And then the other thing that you might hear me use, a term that you might hear me use, is yards, which is where a family have just a small piece of land where they provide for themselves and their immediate family. So you might have like 2 or 3 caravans on there, mum and dad and their children, something like that. And you do actually have a number of authorised yards in Calderdale district. So that's where people have got planning permission to provide for themselves, and they're just living there like me and you would live in a house, but in a caravan. And a lot of families want to do that, like that's their preferred way of living, but it's very difficult for them to get that planning permission. So that's the main barrier to people providing for themselves in that way. Sorry, I feel like I've gone on a bit there, but I know those are terms that people get really confused about. So I hope that's useful just to sort of explain some of what that is. And I'll hand over to, is it Richard now?
Yeah. So, I mean, in planning terms, there are actually similarities between how policy requires us to plan for the accommodation or housing needs of the settled population and the gypsy and traveller population. We are required to carry out research to identify what the objectively assessed need is, just as we have done for the local plan in terms of the need for houses for the settled population. We need to carry out that exercise for the gypsy and traveller population. So it's set out very clearly in planning policy, and the planning inspector who's considering the local plan, we're expecting her to recommend, when she issues her report on the local plan, that we submit what's called a development plan document. So it's a planning policy document covering gypsy and traveller accommodation needs within 12 months of adopting the local plan. So we would submit that, and it would go to examination. So again, in similar way to with the settled population, you need to establish what your objectively assessed need is, and that's a piece of research which will encompass demographic and statistical information, but also engagement directly with the communities. Really, that need assessment is the starting point. It's the sort of the baseline for taking informed decisions thereafter. So the previous piece of work we did was in 2015. That was undertaken by a company called ARC4, and Leedsgate were involved back then, but clearly sort of 7 years old, that's now out of date. So in the last few weeks, we've commissioned ARC4 to carry out a refresh of that assessment, and obviously we're hoping to engage with Leedsgate in that process, and that will help us to understand what the need is for both permanent accommodation, but also the transit accommodation. So quite different needs, really, as Ellie was describing. The people who wish to stay in one place with a yard, and also the people who are sort of travelling through Calderdale and might only be there for a few days. So, as I say, the first stage is to establish that need, and then the next stage, which you go on to, is that process of identifying land. So that's really where we're at in the planning process at the moment, and I'll answer any questions, but that's just sort of a quick overview of the planning position.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. If it's okay, I've just got one more thing to say, if that's all right, Chair, before we so it was just about, in the meantime, we're conscious that we do have travellers visiting. Obviously, as Ellie's explained, we have travellers already resident in Calderdale, but we do have travellers visiting our borough, and in light of the inequalities and the experiences that we're aware of, we have got a process that we've put in place. We really want to support the health, well-being and education of traveller families that are visiting Calderdale. So we've got a procedure that we've put in place that means that we visit travellers when there's an encampment, and engage with them in relation to the sort of health, well-being, education needs of the families that are visiting. And we think that's really important. In the meantime, that we do the as part of the process, we do a welfare check, and then we've got an arrangement in place so that if there's children visiting in the family that are visiting the borough, or if there's any of the women that are pregnant, etc., that we engage with them and make sure that we're offering them some support from across our partners. So it was just to let you know that that's what we're doing in the meantime, I guess, as we implement our plan on a page. So I'm going to stop there, Chair, and obviously we're all here, a number of us here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Ellie, as well. Right, I've got a couple of hands up already, but first I'm going to invite Councillor Patient in first, to add on.
And thank you, Chair. I'm not just here for the climate change item, and I guess I'll explain why that is, because I'm really glad Ellie's here, and actually it could have been any member of cabinet, because it's clearly a very, very cross-cutting idea. My portfolio overlap is housing, but clearly it's a planning issue, public health issue. You can see in the report that there's consequences for children and education, as well as ongoing social care. So I think that's really important to emphasise, that it's has to be a holistic piece that exists across the council. And there's a saying that the disability rights people use: nothing about us without us is for us. And I think that's great that Ellie's here on this call to sort of help emphasise that, because clearly doing this in partnership is going to be key to making it work properly. Dare I say, we're pretty good at doing partnership work in Calderdale, so long may that last. And I won't waste any more of your time, but I'm interested to hear what people's comments are. Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Councillor Patient. Right, members, hands up have been going up already, and as they've been appearing. Oh, sorry, Scott, would you mind taking your hand down for me, please? Yeah, thank you. Oh, hello. Councillor Holdsworth, your hand's disappeared, it would seem. Yeah, Steve. Well, I'll ask you in due course, but first of all, anyway, Councillor Smith and then Councillor Thompson. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I think it's really it's well written, and I really like the idea that you've got all the actions and you can see quite clearly on the page, and I'm really glad it's been done in consultation. I suppose just the removing of the word illegal around beside encampments, but I think you've probably got that, because I just think that's misleading in lots of ways. My question is really around the discrimination a lot of gypsies face when they have a piece of land and they want to make it into a yard. How can we combat that? Because, they're basically providing their own housing, and I really think we should have a more positive attitude towards that. And I think that has been a long-standing problem. And then there's one other thing that it's kind of question for Ellie, really. It's around, you said 2/3 of gypsies live in housing. Now, when I've been out canvassing in Calderdale, and a lot, there are certain areas where there are more gypsy families, and a lot of them are not non-voters, absolutely not engaging. I do not say that is the case for everyone, but I wonder how we can get engagement, because I just feel that the lack of representation is again, it's another factor that we need to hear these voices. And I suppose if we were having if they were engaging, if there was any way we could get more engagement, we might have a better system of working together and having more equality. Thanks.
Thank you. Ellie, did you want to respond to that question? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you, Chair. So with regard to planning first, often local communities supported by elected members lead campaigns against planning applications from local gypsies and travellers, and we've had all sorts of things over the years occur, such as people standing outside school gates getting petitions signed, keep the travellers out, fun days organised around keep the travellers out, things that have bound sort of local communities together in solidarity against gypsies and travellers, which obviously is a very unwelcoming and difficult for those families, especially where people have spent all of their life savings on trying to provide for themselves and then are not being able to. So I think from an elected member perspective, I think being educated about the circumstances of gypsies and travellers and why they might be wanting to provide for themselves and the lack of accommodation that they have elsewhere, working with people at the early stages of those planning applications, so that the local authority can work, I guess, more collaboratively about local impact and stuff like that. Because, I mean, often it's fear rather than an actual unrest that people are worried about. People have lots of negative perceptions of gypsies and travellers, and I think the last public attitude survey that was done in 2018 showed over 40% of the national population had held negative views on gypsies and travellers. So it's a really significant number of people that think negatively about gypsies and travellers, and are when you say, there might be a gypsy traveller site down the road, would be genuinely fearful that their lives are going to be totally disrupted. And but that's not true, and that's not our experience that in working with a lot of these families. So I think it's about being measured and educating yourselves, and being careful about what you support in terms of local campaigning. And then in terms of the sort of engagement with political institutions, I would say, again, traditionally gypsies and travellers wouldn't see local authorities or elected members as being there for them, and wouldn't see that they could be their allies, and that's because of histories of discrimination and exclusion. So more likely to be sort of fearful of that rather than want to engage in it. And I think if you look at the history of gypsy and traveller people in the UK, there's sort of good reason for that, in terms of going back going back a very, very long time, there were laws saying that you could be hung for the crime of being a gypsy, or you could be hung for the crime of fraternizing with a gypsy. And I say going back a very long time, but we're only talking like, 500, 600 years. So that is still in the cultural memory of gypsies and travellers. So people can be very fearful of authorities. And in more recent times, like, people have been very fearful of social services and removal of children and things like that, which unfortunately has happened at a disproportionate level to those communities. So yeah, there's lots of reasons why people might be worried about engaging in that. But I think just starting the conversation, showing you're there, knocking on the door, having that chat is really, really positive. Keep doing it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, the first question is more just around the kind of evidence statistics we've been saying, because obviously there's various different groups, and there's the housed population, there's the kind of permanent camped population, and then there's the travelling population who are nomadic. So I was wondering if there's any kind of knowledge around the disparity between those groups themselves. For example, is it a case that the nomadic population have the worst health outcomes out of those groups, and if so, how we manage that? And then I was also going to ask around, I think it's difficult because there's kind of almost an innate conflict in how we work on this, because we've got the kind of holistic supporting health, supporting well-being and all of that, but then simultaneously you've got the enforcement action and all of that, and it seems to me there's kind of an innate conflict there, and there'll be kind of a tug of war between kind of departments and between resources on how we manage that. So I was just wondering internally how we are kind of managing that, because what tends to happen in these situations, and it's something we'll all be familiar as councillors, is an encampment pops up, there is quite a large kind of voice around getting it removed and getting people moved on, and then it's going through the process of doing that, and then afterwards there'll be discussion of cost and cleanup and all of that, which is the enforcement side. But fundamentally our innate right and our innate job is to make sure that we are keeping people safe and looking after them, when they're within the borough. So I'm just wondering about that conflict kind of internally and how we mitigate that.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. You've got a catch-22 situation there to a great extent between a travelling community who views political figures with deep suspicion because they consistently campaign against their encampments. It's very topical for Calderdale. Did any officer or perhaps anyone want to come back on those observations of Councillor Thompson?
I've put my hand up, Chair. Sorry, probably you might not be able to see if is it okay if I have a go at responding partly to that? Thank you. I mean, thank you. It's I think it's a really important point, and I think the reason that we've developed that plan on a page is to have that more joined up approach across the organisation. And actually, we Heidi, Ollie from enforcement, Heidi from housing, myself and my colleague Joe went and visited Ellie and Ellie's colleagues at Leeds Gate, and we really and Richard's been heavily involved as well in our work. So we want to, it's sort of the reason, I think that challenge, Councillor Thompson, that you're highlighting is one of the reasons that we've developed that plan on a page, so that we are really clear about what we're trying to achieve and how we work together as an organisation. I do think that that it's that the combination of making sure that we do have places where travellers that are visiting the borough can come that are authorised is a really important part of this as well as making sure that we're conscious of the discrimination and the inequalities that the community experience. So I think that's what we're trying to do with our plan on a page, really. And again, we are. And the other thing I think it's probably in the documents you've had, is that we are actually looking to jointly recruit a post somebody from the community to work with us, to support us as an organisation, make sure that we meet our responsibilities under the Equalities Act as well.
Could I just come in quickly as well, Chair? Is that
Of course,
okay? So just to say, really well observed from Joe about that conflict, and that's something that occurs in our work in all of the different local authorities that we work in. That especially the people that are most likely to first go out and visit an encampment are in an enforcement role usually, and that that sends out a certain message, doesn't it, to those people that are resident on that camp, but like Deborah said, we're working really closely together, and I think one of the ways in which we get around that is through having independent people whose role isn't about enforcement, doing some of that work with people. So recognise that on some occasions enforcement needs to happen. We would hope that it's not on every occasion, and that we can do more negotiating and working together. But yeah, that is separate to our inquiries about people's well-being, and it's separate to our inquiries about children's education, and that there's something provided for people that they can see as independent of that enforcement and actually there to support them. And when that is provided, people are incredibly grateful, incredibly welcoming to workers, and we've always had really positive experiences of going out and doing that engagement on camps. And on the point about health, interestingly, the biggest study that was ever done around gypsy and traveller health indicated that people's mental and physical health was better when they were nomadic rather than settled. However, it is a lot harder to access services when you are nomadic, just even like a GP. But I think the reason the statistics showed that was because people were living within their culture and within their extended family units and had access to more support. So yeah, the health of gypsies and travellers in houses was found to be the poorest. But there might also be a correlation there between people do stop travelling when they have ill health. So people that have moved into a house might be more likely to have done that because they were poorly in the first place. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a more complex picture than I was expecting. Yeah, Councillor Thompson's question was not dissimilar to the one that I was going to be asking about. Mine was more focused on health outcomes, but yeah, you've touched upon that. Thanks, Ellie. So that's adds more nuanced picture, I think. Now, members, before I start weighing in, does anyone else have anything that they wish to ask or make a comment on? I'm not seeing any hands going up. No, right. Okay, my turn, if I may. Enforcement. Yes, it would be nice if we got to a point where it's more signposting than enforcement, which leads us on to the traveller sites. Now, what has surprised me to a certain extent from Mr. Seaman's comments was the fact that with the development of the local plan, several the housing allocations have been identified as ripe for planning application once the local plan has been approved. I'm just a bit surprised that not in tandem that the potential identification of traveller sites hasn't been listed as well. Now, over the years, there was one particular site that was considered, I think, Derek Cooper Bridge, and that was going to be in partnership with Kirklees. Now, for me, that site is potentially problematic from an air quality point of view, traffic point of view, and not to mention the fact that there was for a long time I planned to redevelop that the whole Cooper Bridge road network as part of Kirklees' local plan, but that's been abandoned on grounds of the climate emergency, I understand. But with that, the conversation about the traveller site there has also disappeared from the radar as well. I make occasional inquiries about this in scrutiny meetings, and it tends to come across a brick wall. So my question really is to inquire as to why haven't we been looking at the identification of potential traveller sites as the local plan was developed in the same way that we did look at permanent housing sites, and And is there any conversation at the moment as to where those sites potentially might actually be? Because I mean, that we can fully expect that there may well be a strong local objection to those. Yeah, I don't know who wants to field that as a reply before I then bring in Councillor Benton, who's got her hand up as well. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thank you.
Shall I just so obviously we submitted the plan, or the plan came forward to members for approval, and then it was published and submitted back in 2018. And I think it was felt at the time that there was only sort of so much sort of headspace available in terms of dealing with the issues that we had to deal with at that time. So there was some sort of fairly detailed consideration, and what we've done through the local plan is set out some strategic policies, but as I suggested earlier, undertaken to carry out a separate exercise to deal with the issue of gypsy and traveller accommodation. Now, I think it's very much a case in terms of sites. It's very much a case of sort of trying to do things in the right the right order. So looking for a site before you've identified what the need is, when you need to know where the site needs to be located, you need to know how big it needs to be, you need to know whether it's to meet a transit or a permanent need. So it's really about trying to sort of sequence things. And obviously what we can then do in terms of sites is that we will review land in council ownership. There's also the potential to carry out a sort of call for sites approach, where, similar to what we did with the housing allocations, you effectively put something out and say to people, have you got land that you're interested in putting forward? But that's a process that we need to go through once we know what our area of search is and how much land we need. And obviously there's all the sort of usual sort of locational requirements. I mean, you mentioned air quality. You wouldn't want to put a site in an air quality management area. There's things like accessibility to schools, accessibility to amenities. So there's a lot of sort of, what's the word, sort of levels of sort of screening that you need to go through to identify a potentially suitable piece of land. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Now, before Tina, you've taken your hand back down again. In that case, I'll bring in Scott, if I may, again, before I come to Councillor Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, let us be clear that actually, you know, and this comes back to the start, isn't it? It's not about us picking sites for the gypsy and traveller community. This is about us beginning that conversation about how we manage this whole conversation around our relationship with that community and those communities. I think that really needs reinforcing at this stage, and I think a lot of the discussion tonight has been about resetting the relationship as well between elected members and that community, because I think we've heard stories about where conflict can arise and where it has arisen. And I guess from my point of view, I'm almost looking at this meeting in terms of getting some advocacy out there and creating sort of allies from the very, very start. I think Ellie's done a fantastic job of starting to educate us, where clearly we've all got gaps in our knowledge around, around this issue. And it seems to me that we're sort of at the start of a journey, and how we manage it is going to be critical. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're actually singing on the same page then in some respects, because I think the first word that comes into my head where accommodation is concerned is dignity. And I think that, I think everyone's entitled to that with their housing needs, or accommodation needs, shall we say. Councillor Clark and then Councillor Young, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My original question was going to be how the healthcare check was received, but Ellie well and truly answered that really, really well. I'm really pleased about that. The second question, it's a little bit more practical. The key component of good health is surely clean water. How is that provided? How is it obtained? On, say, permanent sites, would you have mains water? Yeah, it's just these things buzzing around. Yeah.
Do you want me to do that one? Yeah. So on a site, on an authorised site, if it's provided by a local authority, people have what they call sheds, which is like a utility block. They vary in quality, normally dependent on when the site was built. So a lot of older sites, they sort of do actually resemble a shed, hence why travellers call them sheds. And they will have very basic like toilet facilities and maybe a small kitchen, but yeah, running water provided. And then on sites that have been upgraded more recently, they tend to be like bigger, better insulated, and have like a little sitting area as well. That can also be used for when people get older and maybe develop mobility problems or poor health, meaning that they can still live on that site, on that plot, on that site, and be comfortable. In terms of people that are living on what we call the roadside or unauthorised encampments, it's a struggle. Often people get water from petrol stations, or they will like maybe know somebody in a house where they can get water. We have an outside tap at our building in Leeds where people are very welcome to come and help themselves whenever. It's not locked, so people can just let themselves into our back garden and get that whenever they need. But yeah, certainly getting fresh water and what like toilet and washing facilities are like really difficult for people on the roadside. Often people will use like swimming baths, like pay to go swimming, but use the showers instead of actually going swimming. So yeah, it can be a challenge in Leeds as a part of the negotiated stopping agreements. The local authority do provide portaloos and drop off fresh water, not always, but sometimes. And they also provide like rubbish disposal. So they'll bring out skips, or they'll leave people with like, council waste bags, and then the caged van will come round and collect them on like a daily basis. And I think what we've found is a lot of the complaints that you get around unauthorised encampments actually tend to be around, the environment and rubbish and things like that. So it's almost like, let's remove those things and try and work more positively together as the different communities, by just removing a thing that people are obviously going to complain about. If there's rubbish, if we provide people with waste disposal, then that's really going to help, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. There's no doubt in my mind that we do need a Travellers site within the boundaries of Calderdale. But the problem is, I think every elected member will have similar ideas, that they will dread having a Travellers site in their wall, because the amount of objections you get and emails from your local constituents would be overpowering, I would say. So it's a very hard one to figure out, but we definitely need one, but it would be a case of not in my ward, wouldn't it? Which is bit NIMBY, but probably truthful.
Yeah, that is the real danger, and I'm not trying to hide away from the fact that that's going to be a difficult one, but it is ultimately something that is going to have to be grappled. Okay, So final two before I draw this one to a close. Thank you. Councillor Smith and then Councillor Benton. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think it's how we package it, and it goes back to all that engagement and you know, sharing and letting people know about the, you know, getting rid of the negative stereotypes. And I do think Ellie made a really important point. I've seen the travellers being blamed for a huge amount of dumping that wasn't actually their doing. They'd long gone. And I think we as a local authority need to make sure that we are in there scooping it up and it's clean and gone as soon as the travellers have moved on. And I really think, I mean, that goes for other groups of people that get victimised and blamed for dumping rubbish and leaving messy gardens. So I'd really, really like to say that. And sorry, one more point. I think people believe, you know, quite often throw around the idea that, you know, the travellers don't pay council tax. On traveller sites, they do pay council tax, and I think even on the temporary sites that they pay a rent. So I think it is just worth saying that, you know, these do generate income for you know, the traveller sites do generate income, and they could be as good and you know, positive as we make them. And I think, yeah, definitely advocate for them. I don't see there's anything wrong. If we've got a good site in Sowerby Bridge, bienvenido.
Thank you. Last comment from Councillor Benton, then to Ellie to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. It was just looking back on the plan, and I've noted that it says you'll work with partners and local residents.
That's a shame. We've lost her. You're back. Phew, just in the nick of time. Tina, we lost you there. Do you want to unmute yourself? Tina, do you want to unmute yourself?
I think it does come back to dialogue and conversation with residents across the board, obviously with the new site, but particularly the unauthorised encampments as well. If there was more, you know, conversations between the council staff and the residents, maybe, you know, they'd all get on a lot better. I think part.
You're dropping in and out again, I'm afraid, Tina. I think we've got the general drift, but yeah, your connection seems to be a bit fuzzy. Right, Ellie, thank you very much indeed. Last word to you, and then we'll call this one a wrap.
Thank you so much. I won't take up too much time, but just to respond to what the councillors have said there, yeah, totally agree. Being proactive, not reactive, is the thing that we have found most important. So all of that stuff around planning around your encampments, provide rubbish facilities, provide toilets, communicate with local residents, and you're doing that from the off, saying, yeah, we've seen it, we know, we you know, we're on it, we've got this in hand, rather than local residents coming to the local authority and yeah, asking for a reaction. And in terms of the comment that Councillor Smith made about often travellers getting blamed for things that they didn't actually do, 100%. And I have literally been there when a camp pulls off and put the rubbish bags in my car and taken them home and put them in my dustbin, and been on Facebook and just seen, oh, they left such a mess. I'm like, I was there when they pulled off and there was nothing there. So it happens a lot, and it happens all the time. So better communication, I think, with local residents. And unfortunately, for gypsies and travellers, they're an easy group of people to blame for lots of things in society that they're not responsible for. So I would just like to say thank you so much for inviting Leeds Gate into this conversation. It's been a really positive conversation, and we really look forward to working with all of you on taking this forward. So yeah, really appreciate you inviting us here today.
Well, thank you, Ellie, for coming along and helping us understand better. Deb, thank you very much for your report. Ollie and Heidi, thank you both for being in attendance, just in case. But yeah, I think it would have yeah. Although we haven't engaged with you, but yeah, I do appreciate the fact you've dropped in to back up Deb on that one. Right, so I think we're therefore ready to move on. I don't think there's anything we need to do with that particular session. There's no vote to be taken or anything like that. So I think we can move on to the next part of the agenda. let me just mess about fractionally here. Okie dokie. Yeah, I'm having to dodge between mute as I sort of splutter and cough my way through the meeting. So we're looking on to the next part, which is the climate change elements, the action plan for which is currently out for consultation. I'm going to work on an assumption, Scott, that you'll be wanting to present this, or is one of the officers going to be doing that one?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be leading the first bit of it, and then I'm going to segue into Debs, and we'll try and sort of do a little double act two-hander on it if we can. As long as the tech agrees with us. We first need to share the presentation, don't we?
I'm just looking at doing that now, so I'll just be 1 second.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Debs. I'll try and fill some dead space.
Yeah, apologies, it's painfully slow. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I mean, sorry.
Sorry, I was about to say, as a bit of a heads up to officers and members, that this might be a bit of a longer meeting, because I think the next two items are reasonably significant and important and deserve our considerations. But we'll see how we go.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Debs. I'll just say next at the end of when I've spoken, and then we'll do it like that. So, I mean, thank you, Councillor Dickinson and Place Scrutiny for allowing us to come and speak to you about the Calderdale Climate Action Plan draft version at this point, and just to emphasise, it is a Calderdale Climate Action Plan, not a Calderdale Council Climate Action Plan, and it's in draft and currently out for consultation. Next. Okay, so a bit of scene setting for everyone. I think we all know about how climate change it poses a significant threat to our way of life and our vulnerabilities here in the valley. I think we all have either been affected by flooding in one way or another, or knows someone who has, and that's not even thinking about the drought we've had this summer, you know, moorland fires and other ways that we've been affected. We do need to act now, and that's what we're trying to do as a council by sort of facilitating a discussion around this. Next. And the good news is most of you know that a lot of work's already happening. You'll recall back in the early months of 2019 that we declared a climate emergency. I think we were one of the first local authorities to do so. From there, obviously created a cabinet role around that, and in 2020 set some targets, ambitious targets. So we've pledged in Calderdale to become net zero by 2038, with significant progress by 2030. That's in step with Greater Manchester, who also have that as their target, as does the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and the International Panel on Climate Change also recognise that as the date to work towards. So we feel like we're baked in good science there and good partnerships. In 2021, we were also, I think, one of the very few and still very few local authorities to model an emission reduction pathway, which shows us the sort of scale of what we need to do and the science behind it to cut fossil fuel use. We used Element Energy, who also did Committee on Climate Change's emission reduction pathway that the government uses. And they also did West Yorkshire Combined Authorities that Wicker and Tracy are using to track their progress. And this year, late 21 and most of this year, we developed this climate action plan to set out the action that needs to take for the first 3 years of the plan to start that journey on us to a net zero future. Next, and a little bit about the Climate Action Partnership, who basically were the arbitrators of pulling this together, formerly known as the Calderdale Council Climate Cabinet Working Party. It's developed into much more of a broader partnership. Myself and Debs sort of re-interviewed everyone that was part of that, and it's got a few new members now, and we're just trying to widen the scope of it It's councillor-led, I chair it, but it is very much cross-party. Councillor Dickinson's been a key part of that, so I know you've been a key ally in sort of helping develop it along that journey since you've been involved. And it includes partners like Together Housing, the NHS, people from the community like Allies in Slow the Flow, and activists from various environmental groups such as Friends of the Earth. We've got representation from Calderdale Green New Deal, although that's not what he's there for. He's there for community energy, but we do have a sort of broad representation, as well as Youth Council. That was the most important, I think, cohort that we had there right from the start, and they've been fantastic. And it's supported by key officers, including Debs, because it's a public health crisis, as well as Sheila, Sheila O'Neill, who's on this call, Kate McNicholas and Heidi Waters, because this crossover with regeneration, transport, housing. It is very much another cross-cutting area. And working groups for the Climate Action Plan were supported by other officers within the council as well for that, some of that very granular deep dive expertise. Next. So production of the Climate Action Plan. So you'll see where we are. We are here, there in the consultation period, and that's up until the 20th of November. And it's been co-produced, as I said, by the Climate Action Partnership. So we're here because we're asking for feedback on the draft Climate Action Plan to check that it does address the issues that are most important to our residents and businesses, because it is going to be a document that affects everyone that lives, works and visits the borough. So we want to make sure we get it right, that we prioritise what needs prioritising. If there's anything missing from there, that it gets put in, and that it just, in the end, is something that very much feels fed and led by the people of Calderdale. Next. And I'm going to set the scene here, and then I'm going to let Debs talk about some of these, sort of deep dive into what some of these areas are. So as I've said before, the plans is a 3-year strategy, and it focuses on the actions that are going to make the biggest difference for everyone. So we want those quick sort of wins, and we also want to really demonstrate that we're taking that action. And the plan is split into 6 themes, all based around the idea of shared voice. So land and nature, transport, community climate action, warm and resilient buildings, and the green economy. And I'm going to invite Debs now to talk a little bit more about them. Over to you, Debs.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of detail. You have had the plan itself and the summary, but I'm just going to go through just a few of the key sort of actions that we've identified under each of those themes. So the shared voice theme is really about how we're going to work together to inspire and champion action on the global climate emergency. So this is the element that's about inspiring, that's about lobbying beyond Calderdale, and how we work together across the place, really. So the key actions there are strengthening and expanding our climate action partnership, which Councillor Patient has already mentioned. Being really clear about the progress that we're making, being able to report on the difference that we're making, the action that's been taken, and whether we're on target or not. Collaborate and influencing in Calderdale and beyond Calderdale, and working really with our partners so that we enable organisations to embed climate action into everything that we do. The next theme is around community climate action, and this is really about how we're going to work with local communities to inspire positive climate action. So there's things that we can all do, and communities particularly. We've got an amazing voluntary climate action, voluntary and community sector in Calderdale. It's absolutely incredibly inspiring, and there's something about how we support that action that happens in our local voluntary and community sector. So the key actions we've identified here are launching low carbon community advice hubs, spreading the word of climate action in our communities, helping people build sustainable lives across the things that we buy, and particularly the food that we eat as well, and supporting communities taking action, including developing local neighbourhood climate action plans where communities want to do that. which is what's there. In terms of warm and resilient buildings, I'll just flick through these actions. So this is how we'll set out how we'll make every home in the borough warm and resilient, but also our buildings, so not just homes, but buildings in our borough as well. So this includes us really starting. We're not going to be able to sort of deliver loads and loads of retrofit for all of our buildings in the next 3 years, but we can get ready. We can prepare the ground for retrofit in our buildings. We can also make sure that trusted advice is available to find on home retrofit, so that people that are looking to invest in retrofitting their own building, their own home, or they've got really good technical advice and access to that. Building success by demonstrating retrofit solution in community, so showing the art of the possible, showing what a retrofit looks like, showing what a low carbon home actually looks like, making steps towards low carbon and new homes and neighbourhoods being the standard in the borough, and continuing to deliver grants to ensure flood resilient buildings as well. Then when we move on to the green economy, our green economy theme sets out how we'll make the most of the new sectors, the skills, the jobs, the technology that we're going to really need in order to achieve our net zero aspiration. How we develop an economy that will have those skills and use those technologies. So this will include us supporting businesses that will help deliver our journey to net zero, really looking at growing green jobs and green skills, working with our partners across the borough. It's making sure that we're supporting businesses so that they can do things differently to reduce emissions, celebrating innovation that's part of the solution, and supporting renewable energy projects to benefit businesses and local communities as well. Transport and getting around is a really key element of change that we're going to need if we're going to achieve our net zero aspiration. So this sets out how we're going to tackle pollution and improve different transport choices so people can get to where they need to without using a car. So this includes the actions that we've identified here, a strong voice on public transport decisions, really investing in that infrastructure so that we can make cycling a really scale up the amount of cycling that's done, and active travel in our borough, creating mobility hubs to join up transport options, working with and supporting car club providers to expand so that we people are sharing cars as well, making sure electric vehicle charging infrastructure is in the borough, it's accessible and available and affordable to our residents, and creating streets for everyone, so that our streets are attractive for people to walk and cycle and for pedestrians. And then land and nature. So our land and nature theme sets out how we're going to restore and create the wild places to reduce our flood risk and protect our plants, insects and animals. And the key actions that we've identified in here are around creating an ecological emergency plan by 2023, restore peatlands and absorb carbon, support slow the flow, expand to reduce flooding in our towns, develop farming for the future advice with landowners and farmers, and play our part in absorbing carbon by creating a woodland that stretches from Liverpool to the Yorkshire coast, so our Calderdale part of that. And I'm not going to go through the case studies, but the action plan that you've had the link to does in each of the themes does give some examples of real things that are happening in Calderdale or elsewhere that are actually making this real. We've got some amazing work going on in our borough, and we really wanted to share some of that, the art of the possible, and really show the fantastic things that are happening. So please do look at the action plan and be inspired by some of those fabulous case studies. So the consultation is, we've got another month. A month today is when the consultation finishes, and so it's a really been a 2-month consultation. We really want to hear from people. We've got a questionnaire that people can complete, that we can email, that gives people the opportunity to give rich information. We've also got an online questionnaire that can be completed by individuals or groups, and the link is there. And we've also got a communications plan, so that we can really try and reach out and get consultation responses that reflect the diverse makeup of our borough. And we're really interested in your help today. I guess we want Scrutiny Board's help for thinking about groups that you could help us get to. You could encourage people to complete and respond to our consultation. Let us know about any events that are going on between now and the 20th of November that you think we can be available, and help just encourage people to respond to the consultation. We've just got a couple getting involved as well. So our new climate action partnership that Councillor Patient mentioned at the beginning, early in the presentation, we are looking for members from the voluntary and community sector and from businesses particularly. So again, if you're aware of anybody that we could invite or could contact that may be interested in being involved, and then if anybody is interested in joining those delivery groups that we've already talked about for each of the 5 themes, let us know. And then finally, Chair, we just had these questions that we were really keen for Place Scrutiny Board to think about. So how the consultation can reach as many people as possible in the next month, and just your feedback really on the draft action plan. Has it got the right level of ambition? What should the key priorities be? Is there anything missing? So really keen and interested in your comments, and I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a significant piece of work, and I'd like to immediately open it up to members. Thank you. First off the blocks is Councillor Thompson, then Councillor Smith. Thank you.
Yeah, I think obviously, like has already been commented on, it's a massive piece of work, and it's a massive document. So Place Scrutiny has its place in terms of offering some feedback now, but there is that wider consultation. I think my thing always with consultation, and people who've been in meetings with me will be bored witless, because my concern always with consultation is that we always end up speaking to the people who are already very engaged. And in the case of climate action, I think it's difficult because they are the groups out there who will already be engaged and will want to feedback. And it's about how we get out to those communities that we are not necessarily as engaged with. I've obviously spoke a little bit about this with Scott, but it'd be good to hear from you, Debs, as well, about how we can do that, and whether it's a case of doing more face-to-face or those types of things, because the opinions and views of someone who is more skeptical or who doesn't necessarily even have it within their thought process because people are concerned about other things, paying the bills, keeping the lights on, all of that. It would be good to know that we are reaching out beyond just the people who already want to engage with us.
Yes, you're right. I've got a suggestion for that, funny enough, but we'll come back to that in due course. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I suppose it's just about, in some ways, I'm just thinking about the big, huge crisis of the cost of living crisis, and how that's going to implicate on the climate action plan in terms of, consumption of fuel, fuel poverty and food poverty. It's almost like it kind of needs to be reframed in some ways. If that could be done in a healthy way, that would almost bring us to a point of engagement with people that we don't normally engage with. But it just feels at the moment that is just such a negative and difficult thing for people that we're maybe, I don't know. I'm just wondering if there's any positives that we can get from that the level of crisis that people are in at the moment. If there's any positives we can take from that, if there are any sort of slight changes in behaviour that we can use to sort of, I don't know, comment on the action plan. Sorry, I'm not really making very much sense.
I think it's okay to riff on this one, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, Scott, do you want to come back on this one with what you heard so far?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And no, I think that's you did make total sense then, Councillor Smith. I know what you were trying to say, and I mean, clearly the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis are intrinsically linked with each other in terms of social climate justice. And I think, I don't want to say luckily because that's a terrible word to use, but actually like the timing of the plan and the consultation allows us, I think, to have a little bit more thoughtful discussions from perhaps people that might not have been as so engaged with climate change as a concept. And you touched on that, in terms of our reliance on fossil fuels, the fact that we've got a public transport, network that's maybe some people might say is unreliable and expensive. All of these are considerations, aren't they? People fueling their cars and heating their homes. These are all intrinsically linked with each other. It did allow us actually, where we've done leaflets and stuff like that, to have a bit of a dual story, where it's one side it's very much about the consultation, and the other side it's advice and phone numbers and stuff in terms of how people can access services and what's going on in Calderdale. So it allowed us to do that. So actually there was a timing benefit on that. I'll briefly touch on what Councillor Thompson said. But I know he specifically directed that to you, Deb. So I'll let you come in on the rest of it. I think what's great for us is we've got some fantastic members of the team. We really want to pay credit to our officers, led by Heidi, and Deb's. We have the fantastic Issa now on our team, who's specifically doing a lot of the work around engagement and the administration of this. So you'll know if you've seen the front page of the climate action plan thing on our Calderdale website, her email's on there. So if you do want to email a more detailed response, or if organisations or partners want to do, they can do that. But we've already seen some of the responses come back. Clearly the comms plan has been very, very tight. We've worked on comms with its own level of engagement and made sure that we try to speak to everyone. But as you say, Councillor Thompson, there will always be people that don't engage, but we do have some of that data back already for those that have. And I know we're meeting unofficially as a climate partnership next Wednesday to look at who might not have got there so far, and that'll hopefully help us drill down in the final few weeks. Debs, have I missed anything there?
Not at all. I was just to make exactly the same point. I think one of the things that we are able to do is look at the responses we've had so far, and look at then where we might have not as many responses as we'd like from particular parts of our community. And we are having sort of looking at that information as it comes in, so that we can then start to target getting out there and encouraging people to get involved. We did a lot of work in the planning phase to think about a proper stakeholder mapping, if that makes sense. So who are the people we really want to hear from, and what are the best ways for us to hear from those people? And we've really tried to do that, and that's very much informed the approach that we've taken. I also, if it's okay, Chair, just wanted to come back about the cost of living crisis and the climate. The climate emergency as well, and there's been some really, really important work done that's been engaging, listening to the public about the connections between the climate emergency and the cost of living crisis, and really how exploring with the public how they're seeing the connections between the two, so that the two, and what's coming out of that is that the two crises have the same root causes, but also the same solutions, or that a lot of the solutions for both are the same. So sustainable, local, sustainable energy, energy security is one of the solutions, both to the climate crisis and to the cost of living crisis. And I think that's going to be really important that insight that's been gathered, and it's definitely think about how we use that, Councillor Smith, to sort of inform the way that we communicate and the way we talk and listen to our communities about both the climate emergency and the climate. So I thought it was a really important point that you made, and just wanted to say that there's really clever people across the country sort of doing a lot of work on this, really understanding how the public are seeing this at the moment as well.
Thank you for that, Deb. I've got Councillor Clark and Councillor Thompson again for a second about the cherry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased that we've got this objective, which it is. It's not just an aim, it's an objective that we're going to have a good outcome from. I think it's essential that we get businesses involved to create green jobs and green skills, and that in itself can snowball and make the people who are sort of taking those jobs and learning those green skills to let everyone know about it, that it is a green job and that it will help towards carbon reduction and everything. I don't know what we could do without big companies, though. That's the problem, to get the number of employees in this sector. Local ones are great, but they don't employ many people, and that's my worry, that it might be half a dozen jobs here and half a dozen there, but what we need are hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and we don't want low paid jobs, and that comes back into the cost of living crisis. There are far too many low paid jobs. So yeah, I don't know what use that statement is, but there we go. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think there's anything in the way of wrong things to say tonight, to be quite honest with you, Councillor Clark. As I say, I think this is a free-ranging something that a subject that we do need to riff on and dig down and almost stream of consciousness approach in some respects, in some aspects. Sorry, Councillor Thompson, can I just bring in Sheila O'Neill, who's just brought her hand up, and then I'll bring you in, I promise. Sorry, Sheila, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear Sheila? No, I still can't hear you, I'm sorry. Silence isn't always golden.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, rock and roll. Yeah, let's do
there's
it.
something going on with my audio. Sorry, you may well hear the dog bark as well shortly then in that case.
Oh well.
I just very quickly wanted to respond to Councillor Clark's point about the involvement of businesses. You're absolutely right, and it's not just as employers and the work that they do, but it's the people that they employ, obviously, who go out and speak to their families and friends and networks and so on. But we do work very closely with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and there is a Green Skills Task Force at West Yorkshire looking at this very issue that we're closely linking to. The challenge that we all have, and it's not unique to Calderdale, is the nature of business and how it's organised, and there's not one easy route through. So we work with partners like the Federation of Small Business and the Chambers of Commerce and the CIB, and just making sure, CBI, sorry, not CIB, and just make sure that we're making as much of those connections as we possibly can. And I think one of the conversations we've had in our sessions around looking at climate and about employment and growing the economy and good jobs and fair work and all of those things is that all jobs are green jobs to some extent, and it is in the interest of businesses to be resource efficient and to be competitive. They're going to need to be moving forward with technology and in the way that they work. So it's for all of us, I think, in the work that we do to make sure that we're getting that message through. But there are formal channels we're using, and a lot of businesses are ahead of the game, to be quite honest, because they're looking to the future. And I just think it's important that we bear in mind the work of colleges, schools and further education universities. Those connections are all there, but I think we've all got to learn from each other. So I just wanted to reassure you that business is in the conversation. It's not being missed. Thanks, Chair.
Can I just come back in there? I'm really sorry, Joe. What I was thinking was, it's the networking, isn't it, with the people who are employed, with the employers, of spreading the word about what this is all about, rather than it just being a job. That's what I'm thinking. It's about spreading the word and making people very aware of what it is they're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor Clark. And I think part of the conversation, you'll note some of the president, we're going out and speaking to lots of different arenas, different forums. So I'll be at the town board in Brighouse next week talking about climate action plan and encouraging them to spread through their networks. But we start very much about how much it's visible and tangible in day-to-day life in the borough, and that's the starting point, is that this is not something that's in the future or happening somewhere else. It's happening now and it's happening here. So I think that's the very starting point, is that this is about how we're living today.
Yes, thank you. Right, I don't want to give a sense of rush about this, but yeah, Councillor Thompson, at long last.
Yeah, I'm just very grateful that I've heard the phrase I've been wanting to hear all night, which is all jobs are green jobs, because it's a point that I was going to make anyway, but it's something that always comes up in discussion around this. It's all about retrofitting, it's all about engineering, it's all about jobs of the future, but we've got to think about the jobs of now and how we make them more energy efficient and better for the climate. And I think it's one of my biggest pet peeves is when we talk about these grand futuristic jobs, and it's the reality is for 95% of people, they're not the jobs they're going to have. It's like, you know, I work in a cafe, and it's like, how do we look at how that job can be more responsible for the climate, whether it's how we source coffee beans and all of that. And it's very nice to hear that we said prior to me having to go, let's say that. I'm conscious that I do just want to kind of sit back and listen as well, but I've got a few notes and I'll obviously feed into the consultation. A couple of things I'm thinking in regards of how we communicate with people. I'm wondering if it's worth having this as an agenda item for ward forums, if that's possible. Just around timescales, it might be difficult, but if there are ward forums coming up, it might be a case that we could bring it to ward forums as a discussion point for residents. And in terms of things we've got in the pipeline, like mobility hubs and climate action hubs and all of that, it might be worth using the existing resource we have, i.e. the markets, as a way of starting that, because it's probably an easy way in, or an easier way in. And then in just kind of the wider points I wanted to make, there's obviously, as expressed in the document, it's about 51% comes from housing, but we've got this huge issue in Calderdale around private rented sector and how we negotiate that. And you know, there is that issue around, for example, I live in a rented house and I don't even have permission to hang things on my walls. So how am I going to be able to retrofit the entire house? And it's perhaps how we work with landlords. We have done this. We've had a bit on private rented in place scrutiny. So there is some discussion there, but it's just how we work with that. And then I was also thinking just kind of generally within, we are limited in terms of what we can influence as a local authority and what we can actually do. But tonally throughout the document, and I understand why this is, and it's very important, is around individual change, individual action. But my worry is that as people, I think as people struggle more, worldview tends to narrow. It happens with all of us. We tend to look inwards and think, you know, how on earth am I going to pay my bills? Is my job going to be secure and all of that? So I wonder, as we get into the cost of living crisis, it's going to be perhaps more difficult to encourage individual change in how we kind of think about that going forward, and also whether we can take some of that pressure off individuals by doing more work, for example, with the landlords, with the businesses and all of that. But that's all kind of I have to say now, but I look forward to kind of feeding in and listening into the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Patient, do you want to come back in before I bring in Councillor Smith as probably the last contributor before I very briefly sum up?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'll try and pick up a bit on a few of those things. I mean, just to respond to Councillor Thompson, the level of banter in his cafe is definitely sustainable, so he's got that one down. But in terms of business, I think you're right. You know, definitely making sure, this is going back to Councillor Clark's point, making sure that some of that advocacy and some of that sharing of what's going on is embedded. We do have some really good businesses that are already taking sort of really strong steps, including our own Chris Bingham from Craggs Energy. He's actually a member of the Tracy's Green sort of Jobs Task Force. You may know him for being a former sort of self-described oil baron that's basically pivoting his whole business towards sustainability and renewables. Not because he's a rabid environmentalist, but because he sees the sustainability of his business and the people he's hiring. So actually, it doesn't matter how you get there. It's the sort of end result. I'm glad we're having a good discussion about sort of green jobs as well, because I may be preempting what Councillor Smith's about to say, but we went to see the Barratt Home Z House last week, and actually what part of what they were discussing was about how some trades are disappearing, like bricklaying. Bricklaying was like, they really struggled to get those sort of skills on board, and they were saying there's a massive shortage of that. So bricklaying is is clearly a green job, and it's something we need to invest in. So making sure we have partnerships with people from the Todd Climate College all the way to the more vocation-based sort of Calderdale College is going to be key to making sure that kind of join up is there. So I think there is a challenge. And in terms of the private rented sector, Heidi may or may not want to add to this, but what's great from a social housing provider is Together Housing have already used our emission reduction pathway to plot their journey to net zero, so they know what they need to do in terms of retrofit. It's helped them think about placemaking, and they're very much on a journey because they understand about the viability of their properties and what needs to happen, and not just their existing ones, but how they build the houses sort of for the future. But I think getting private rented on board and it is going to be key, and clearly we need to do a lot more work with that sector, because the reality is actually their sustainability as private rented is going to go down if people are looking at their offer, which is attached to the grid, and clearly bills are going up and up, and thinking about what can we do instead, whether that's interest only mortgages or whether that's thinking about social housing as their option. I actually think they're going to have to start moving, otherwise market forces are going to move against them. Hope that's okay. Just a few things there to consider.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Councillor Smith as the last contributor before I have a couple of things to say, and then I'm afraid under pressure of time only, because I could talk about this for far longer. We have to move on to the final item, but thank you. Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Thanks. I suppose again it's whether or not we believe in the growth model, and it's just that growth sustainability balance, because I think somebody said about it doesn't matter how we get there. Well, it kind of does. If you're generating loads and loads of green energy and you're encouraging people to use it loads and loads, I think we've kind of gone the wrong way about it. It's about living on a sustainable planet. It's about us not exceeding what our resources. I think there are renewables, but I don't think it's about wasting. And I know that wasn't the point that you were making, but I just think it is growth via sustainability of the planet. I think that really concerns me.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith. And at the risk of sounding dangerously subversive, I do sometimes question, when is enough enough? But in terms of practical suggestions, as for the requested, as per the request at the brief at the original of the at the beginning of the report, in terms of how getting the word out there, may I suggest supermarkets? Saturday mornings, for example, having a stand up, something like that. It's a great way, apparently. Dare I say it, politicians use it to great effect for canvassing purposes in terms of reaching their electorate. So I think we could use the same tools to benefit the attempt to get the word out to the residents of Calderdale. So yeah, Tesco's, Brighouse, Morrison's, and Sainsbury's in Halifax, and so on, creep up the valley. It's a bit of an ask. We're gonna, it'll need the personnel and the additional paraphernalia to go with it. But that would be my solid suggestion, I think, to in terms of getting the word out there. I think my concerns with, and it's been touched upon, by other members this evening. With my background in heating and an understanding of building process, is that I'm already coming across reports of buildings being built today that will need retrofitting. I would love it if somehow or another, I don't know if it requires a national change of thinking or whether it's something that could be enacted at a local level. Are you saying national, are you, Scott? You agreeing?
It all starts with building regs ultimately, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah, and I have written to the Secretary of State, whoever it was that week. In terms of raising those standards, because I should so hate to see houses being built under the local plan, auspices of the local plan, having to go through retrofitting within a very short period of time because they're not fit for purpose. But that's I think that's something I'm going to have to take on board elsewhere. There are other things I wanted to say as part of a discussion. I think, quite honestly, I'm going to have to feed that into the consultation simply because of pressure of time. And I'm sorry about that, because as I could carry on ranting on about this very happily. Because I think we are in essence on the same page here. Last, very last thing to Sheila.
Thank you, Chair. Can I be very cheeky on behalf of my colleagues and just say that one of the reasons for being here is that you can go out and be advocates for this and to promote the reach and to encourage people to talk about it, whether it's at the supermarket or at the school gates or at work or wherever. So that's really, I'm just mindful of the teams and how busy everybody is and that the clock's ticking literally on the piece of work, but also on the climate agenda. So that's just a plea from us as officers, I think. Chair,
yeah, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Scott, thank you very much indeed. And the officers as well. I think possibly too many to mention, who may or may not have said something. Thank you also for your involvement again for this evening. This is a very important piece of work. This is the future we're talking about. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll be talking about this again. I just really, actually, before we move on, I do want to pay tribute to the work that's gone into this. I have seen it happening, and it was very useful to have that brought up this evening, because my initial concern with the consultation document, as it currently stands, was that it seemed to be a little bit fuzzy. Actually, I've changed my mind. I think it's a lot more than fuzzy. I think there's a lot there for people to actually be able to get to grips and understand in a simple way, and I think that's a tribute to the effectiveness and the way that's been drawn up. And this needs to work as far as I'm concerned. I do wish this every success, and I look forward to seeing how this goes forward.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Right, okay, moving on. So the planning improvement plan. And I think we're going to have a bit of a presentation from Richard and Sheila. Apologies in advance, as I said, the time is advancing on. We've had some big items this evening. So yeah, over to, can I ask who's going to be presenting this one? Or start presenting this one?
Thank you, Chair. Richard's going to take you through. We're not going to go through all of the slides. Hopefully you will have had time to read the slides. So we're going to pick out some key points. And we thought it would be helpful if members were able to focus on key areas of interest or concern, or areas they'd like to focus on at a future session. But it's really to share some of the good work that's happened over the last period of time since we reported back to Scrutiny. So I'll hand over to Richard, who will just pick out some of the key points.
Yes. So people can hear me okay and see the slides. So essentially, this is the presentation that we shared with the papers. So first slide here, it sets out some of the key achievements, very much around progress on the local plan and the work that we are doing to foster improved relationships with customers, and also flagging some of the really good work with neighbourhood planning forums around neighbourhood plans. I think it's worth highlighting that we are actually seeing some sustained improvement in performance. So obviously we've come from what was a very very low baseline in terms of our 8-week targets to a level that is still below the government target of 70%. But I think the orange line here does show that we are making headway. So moving on to the issue of staffing remains a big challenge, but there have been achievements. We've filled some key, more senior posts. We've successfully, touch wood, filled a vacancy at conservation officer level. We're just doing pre-employment checks at the moment, but we interviewed some really strong candidates there. And we have reduced our reliance on agency staff. We have one agency worker, but that is somebody who actually lives in Calderdale and has worked at some adjacent councils. So that's at the moment that is actually proving to be a very successful arrangement. We're putting a big emphasis on trying to make it easier for staff to do their job, implementing technology. So there's just some screenshots here from the mobile application that staff are now using. So we've been equipping them with tablets to take out on site. And I've just included some screenshots, but just an example here that with the tablet, you can do your notes you can scribble your notes, you can annotate, take a photograph and annotate it, and do a lot of the work that you would have to do back at base. That can be done online. And obviously there continues to be a lot of challenges around staffing. It's a very challenging recruitment market. There's been this move towards even sort of early and mid-career staff wanting to take up more, theoretically more highly paid positions with agencies. And I think it's more than with an absolute shortage of professional planners. It's not just a case of offering to pay more, because all of that does is sort of promote the merry-go-round of staff. And of course, the issues are system-wide. It's not just about planning, it's around those professions that feed into planning, like highways, for example. So I think really in terms of staffing, it's no good sort of just repeatedly doing the same thing if it's not working. So for me, we've got to build partnerships and relationships with universities. We've got a number of very good planning schools in striking distance from here: Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield. So we've got to look at ways that we can get the sort of the brightest and the best candidates to see Calderdale as a great place to work. And we've got to have that focus on our existing staff, continually offering development opportunities. And as I intimated a minute ago, using technology to ensure that we're getting maximum value from our staff, that they're not sort of spending time doing administrative tasks when we can sort of take that away from them through the effective implementation of technology. So moving on to performance management, well, I've talked about an improvement in performance. We've been working closely with colleagues to develop the performance management dashboard. We're implementing a system called Enterprise, which is essentially workflow software. We're also implementing agile artificial intelligence software to try and automate some of the more administrative aspects of the process. And there's a whole sort of host of work we're doing to try and achieve sort of incremental gains in efficiency. And I could talk for hours about those, but obviously I don't want to, I'm not going to do that. So I've talked about the performance management dashboard. That's something that we are working with the business change and performance management team on. But, you know, there are obviously challenges. Turning planning performance around is the proverbial oil tanker. There's a lot of challenges in terms of some customer relationships remain challenging. We've got to do a lot of work to rebuild trust with customers. So in terms of next steps, we're wanting to embed the systems that we are developing, ensuring that staff have the sort of the technical knowledge to use those systems. We need to embed more of a performance management culture, and we need to be ensuring that we have that information, performance management information, available at our fingertips. I think a key issue around performance management is expanding the use of planning performance agreements. So that's where we reach agreements with applicants to for them potentially to provide more resource to help us to determine applications more effectively. So as I say, I've really sort of rushed through those slides, but I wanted to sort of maximize the time for discussion. And I've just on this final slide set out some potential discussion points that members may be interested in following up. So around whether we're making the right changes, what are we missing, what performance management information is important, and what should be the key priorities for the service and where we should focus resources. But if it's okay, I'll stop sharing now, so I can see everybody. Is that okay?
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Members. Sue. Sorry, Councillor Holsworth.
Thank you, Chair. What I wondered, Richard, you've mentioned quite rightly that there are some very good planning courses in the near area, Leeds, Manchester, etc. Have you made any inroads into approaching the career services of those institutions with a view to holding talks to encourage candidates on relevant courses, perhaps even geography, environmental studies, etc., who could convert at master's level to do town planning and pitching the attractiveness of the career?
Yeah, yes, some good points there, Councillor. I mean, I come from a background where my first degree was in environmental management, which actually had quite a sort of large element of planning within it. I didn't think about doing planning until I did my degree in environmental management, and then I went on and studied a master's degree. So that is very much a sort of career path. We've approached Manchester University, had some very early discussions, and they were talking about how they place students around the Greater Manchester boroughs. I think we need a piece of that action, because I suspect a lot of students in Leeds and Manchester. I was a student in Manchester, to be honest. During the 5 years there I was there, I didn't know where. We did a field trip to Hebden Bridge, but I didn't know what Calderdale was. So so we've made some early approaches to Manchester. We've also been talking to Sheffield, Hallam, about the apprentice degrees, and we've had discussions with Leeds, Beckett. So it's something which we definitely need to do. And you're right that we need to be targeting people who, not just planning graduates, but people who've done geography and environmental studies degrees. And I think we need people to understand where Calderdale is, because as I say, you might just be sort of 20 miles away studying in Manchester, but where's Calderdale? I don't know. So and actually selling it as a far more interesting place than some of the big councils. I mean, you go and work for Leeds and you can be given an area that is all suburbia. You'll never ever do that in Calderdale. The opportunities you get in Calderdale to work in everywhere from the sort of the high Pennines to town centres to more suburban areas. You don't get variety of experience in other councils like you do in Calderdale, and we really have to sell that.
I think that's right. And I also think you need to target the University of Leeds, which has a huge department of geography and environmental sciences, etc., and go to some of their careers fairs and tell people what you've just told me. You know, it's a very interesting area in terms of topography, opportunity, and so forth. And it's for commutable. You know, if you live in Leeds, you can get into Halifax pretty quickly by train. So maybe that might be the way forward. I know that you have to pay quite a bit for a stand, but it might be a worthwhile investment.
Yes, I think that's something we will. I will take back and discuss with colleagues, because it's broader than planning. Planning is obviously what we're focusing on this evening, but it's one of a number of professions where, you know, recruitment is an issue. And I think it's really, the other thing is, I think it's really important to sell the benefits of a career in local government. This sort of transition over to careers where people basically travel around the country, spending sort of 6 months in one council and 6 months in the next council on a sort of contractor basis. I really want to sell the fact that there's a good career to be had in local government, and actually spending a good period of time in one council where you sort of get to understand the DNA of the place. That's really important from the point of view of developing as a professional.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to raise any points, ask any questions? Councillor Thompson, thank you.
Yeah, I can almost see the billboard now, Richard, just you doing a thumbs up saying Calderdale has got a plan for you. Maybe Studley Pike in the background. I was just going to ask about, so obviously we've got our kind of measures of kind of our internal success, how quickly we're doing applications, that type of thing. I was wondering if we have any kind of mechanisms for getting feedback from like applicants and objectors and that type of thing, whether it's after a process is concluded for an applicant. is there anything after that in terms of speaking to them to find out, you know, how the experience was for them? What can we improve, that type of thing?
We have, I mean, yes, we have historically had agents forums. I think we've sort of really struggled with the headspace to sort of organise those over the last couple of years, and we have not for a number of years, but we have done customer feedback sort of studies when you issue a decision notice, you ask people to complete, well, in the old days it would have been sort of complete a paper slip and return it. Obviously you would use something like Microsoft Forms these days, and I think that is something we need to do, because it you know, in some respects it sort of gathers richer information than you get from the 8 and the 13-week figures. How quickly have you determined the application, which is what the government measure us on. So I would agree that we do need to be sort of gathering that information and asking people, well, irrespective of the outcome, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the process? And it's the same with objectors. Inevitably, with any application where there's objectors who's opposed to it and applicants who want to get their application through, there's going to be an unhappy party. But from my point of view, you want people to feel that the process has been fair, irrespective of which way it goes. I think that's really important, that even if it doesn't ultimately go your way, you feel that you've had a fair hearing. So yeah, I think there are ways that we can sort of revive that, and as I say, use internet-based or Microsoft Forms-based questionnaires to gather information from the various customers.
Smashing, thanks for that. Yeah, you raised an important point, actually, that needs to be a degree of transparency and equality, I suppose, whether they, depending which way the decision goes, that people are clear as to why they're, well, most especially clear why, if their application has failed. So that, that's fair enough. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Richard, I mean, I've no idea what items you have in your data set where you get all your stats from. But do we have anything that tells us an application has expired and not been carried out? Do we know how many of those there are? Because we do seem to get quite a few through the committee.
Yes, I mean, we can there are ways to get that information. I mean, actually for housing, we actively monitor it, so right. we know how many planning permissions there are for residential development, and we know the rate at which they expire without being implemented. And actually, as part of the local plan examination.
So how do you know that they've not been implemented?
We have
because you're not part of building regs, are you?
Well, yeah, we have a colleague within the policy team who basically works on that kind of statistical information, because you need to have that information, because it tells you whether or not you have what's currently required in terms of a 5-year supply of housing land. So a colleague monitors the planning permissions that are granted, the implementation. He uses building control data. Obviously, we don't deal with all of the building regs, but ultimately he goes out and looks at sites and sees what's happened on the ground. So we actually, in terms of housing delivery, we have some very sort of rich data. I couldn't sort of off the top of my head tell you what proportion of planning permissions expire unimplemented, but we do have that data.
Thank you. I was also wondering about appeals and how many have been. I think we have quite a good record really on appeals, because we don't have many that are upheld.
We generally have a good record on appeals, and actually, if more than 10% of your decisions are overturned on appeal, then effectively the government can potentially designate you for the sort of quality of decision making. But we have a good record on appeals. We've had some success where we've had appeals where we've said, hold on, the inspector's got this wrong, and we've legally challenged. We've had a couple of appeal decisions, interesting appeal decisions recently, which we don't necessarily agree with, but we've looked at them. We had one a couple of days ago for a construction of a relatively large building in the Greenbelt. We think the inspector possibly got it wrong, but we reviewed the decision and there's nothing that we can really sort of go on legally to challenge it. So we're going to have to take that one on the chin. But I think on the whole, we do.
And all that is within your data set.
Yes, we do. And we look at decisions, and I think appeal decisions, I think on the whole, we, across both planning committee and the delegated decisions, we're pretty good in terms of the quality of decisions we take, bearing in mind that obviously it's an inherently subjective exercise. So you can never be 100%.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I was just actually going to ask if it would be possible to have it in, have your God, I've forgotten the word. Have your objectives, have your performance measures, and all the things that you want to your improvement plan, in a sort of way that we could see really clearly where you are, what you've achieved, and what's yet to be done. And then, it'd just be quite a nice sort of way. Well, I like lists, and I think Councillor Robinson sort of suggested something similar at maybe the meeting at the beginning when we first had a look. Just sort of red, green, whatever. I just wonder if that would be possible, just as a quick glance to see where we're at. What's going well, what can you let go, because you have made so many positive improvements.
No, we can certainly, yes, we can do that. It was quite, I started work on trying to sort of produce a tracker that I could bring to a scrutiny board, but it was becoming something quite sort of unwieldy, and where there was a sort of a risk that I could have sort of talked for half an hour through lots of different sort of actions that are red, green, and amber. So I just need to give some thought to how that can be presented in a way that's meaningful to members without sort of just giving you tons and tons of information that you don't necessarily want to sort of wade through. What you really want to see is the highlights. So I think I possibly need to think about how I could present something as a kind of highlight report, and actually give you meaningful information rather than just sort of giving you so much information that it becomes meaningless. But that's something that I'll take back and possibly have a chat with Sheila and colleagues about how we could sort of present it as a highlight report that hopefully gives you some sort of rich information.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a job sheet approach, I suppose. You know, you've been given a list of tasks from the result of the peer review. Which of those tasks have been addressed and completed, and which are outstanding, and the rate of progress on them. Yeah, that's. I'm making it sound a lot easier than it actually is. I do appreciate that. Yeah, if I can weigh in as well in the absence of any other hands. So, information that I would find interesting is, for example, is the validation period. Is it still are we still looking at about 2 to 3 weeks at present, or has that slipped back? What would be an acceptable level of validation period?
Yeah.
I think 3 weeks is kind of like where it was pre-pandemic, wasn't it, or something of that order. The other thing as well that I'm a little bit concerned about, because I believe once an application has been validated, it's supposed to be processed in about an 8-week period. Is that correct? Or with an extension given by permission by the applicants?
Yes.
This is where the problem starts, because my experience of it is that the fear was that if you don't give that permission for that extension, that the application's sort of fairly quickly dismissed and you have to restart. Whether that is basis in fact or not, I don't know, but that seemed to be the fear of the architect as he was approaching it. So yeah, felt he had to give that permission for that extension. And this is when, for example, my application took 11 months, but there's one particular case study I wanted to bring up for your attention tonight, for both of you, Richard and Sheila, is the development at Rastrick Grammar School, which apparently has now been 15 months now, which is it's a long time. I don't know where that is at the moment, but I think both the ward councillors and also the developer would love to know what's going on and how soon they can expect a resolution for it. But from a strategic point of view, it's about addressing the issue of that whilst you're approaching that 70% of hitting the target of processing claims within the 8 weeks, or getting to that extension period agreed and then processing it, is, for my money, without wishing to cause offence, a little bit disingenuous, because once you've got that permission, presumed or otherwise, you then can sort of like put it onto the back burner, add it to the pile of case work that then needs to be processed, which then, I suppose, neatly leads me on to where we are in terms of recruitment. I didn't quite 100% catch what you said. Did you say we're dangerously close to employing a couple of new bodies as case officers? Was that correct?
Yes. So this is quite a few issues there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Lots of things I can. Hopefully, I can sort of. If I maybe start at the beginning with the issue around validation. I mean, if an application is valid on receipt, that's the day where the 8 weeks start. So if there are delays, if it takes you 3 weeks to register the application, but the application was submitted as a complete valid application, then essentially you've lost 3 weeks of your process. So getting applications registered quickly, either telling the agent that they need to supply more information, or saying, yes, you've supplied all the information and we can start assessing this. That is absolutely a critical part of the process. And I mentioned something called the Agile software, and that's about using artificial intelligence to try to automate that process. So that's not about sort of getting rid of people. It's about, if we've got a large proportion of applications that are relatively straightforward in terms of that validation process, you use software to sort of do those more straightforward, lower skilled parts, and you use your people, you use your human brains to actually focus on the more complex bits. So that's something we're going to be implementing over the next few months, with a view to getting applications on case officers' desks as early as possible. If you can get an application on the case officer's desk in 48 hours, and they're assessing it at that point, that is massively better than obviously it not reaching the case officer until week 3 or 4. So that's a big priority for me. I mean, some of the issues around extensions of time, you'll find across the entire country, councils are relying on extensions of time. They can be a good thing because it means that if you need to do that little bit of negotiation to make an application acceptable, you do that rather than kick an application out to achieve a statistical target, which is perverse, really. I don't think Calderdale is unusual in its reliance on extensions of time. I think eventually the government's going to close that loop and potentially really sort of tighten down on the use of extensions of time. So there's got to be an active process of moving away from reliance on them, because the government could turn around next month and say, well, we're getting rid of that. It's 8 weeks or nothing. Issues around such as, say, Rastrick, the school, the prep school at Rastrick, classic example of a kind of not entirely straightforward application. There's some listed buildings there. It's an application where you need a case officer with a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more experience and confidence, and you need the senior officers in place who can manage that casework, and that's the place we need to be getting to, where the application reaches the case officer's desk quickly. The case officer is getting out, they're visiting the site, they're using the mobile application that I described earlier in the presentation, and then they are being actively managed by their team leader or principal officer, who, again, using the workflow software, is ensuring that applications aren't stalling, that those key decisions are being taken, that feedback is being given to the agents, and that the application is being pushed through for a decision. That's the place where we want to be. It sounds very easy the way I'm describing it in terms of getting to that place, but that is the place where we want to be, where there's a much more assertive approach to casework management and performance management of individual officers. That's our aspiration. We're not entirely there as yet. Sorry, I'm being distracted.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, you sorry, Sheila, just before you do, you may be about to provide the answer anyway. I mean, you were using the metaphor of the oil tanker being turned. I completely understand. Yeah, in terms of where we're trying to get to is that place of a well-oiled, a decently well-oiled machine. How soon do you reckon we can get there?
Thank you, Chair. Shall I jump in, Richard?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, that's a
yeah, before I continue giving
probably
Richard
trickiest
more
question of the evening, that, yeah.
Well, Chair, it chimes with the comment I was going to make, actually, and it was in response to, I think it was Councillor Smith's comment earlier on the previous item, that we are working closely together. I speak to Richard regularly about the service and how we're moving forward and how we're progressing, and we do have a tracker of sorts, and Richard's absolutely right about it being difficult to get something that's not unwieldy and becomes an industry in itself and that is useful and helpful, but we can report on the work that we're doing, and we'll think about how we present that back to you. But I think what Councillor Smith said in the previous item was about sometimes the journey is as important as the destination, and I think this is true, in fact, to the planning service, because there isn't a point in time at which we will be finished. This is a continuous piece of work about improvement and adaptation and evolving the service, responding to the environment that we have to work in. You know, we've talked about climate change this evening. That's changing the skill set that the planning officers and supporting services need to have. So it's not a static thing. So I just wanted to be really clear that we're not going to get to a point where we go, that's that job done, and now we'll move on and do something else. This is a new way of working, and Richard and the team have completely refocus the way that they focus on the service, the way that they prioritise the work. Everything about the service is completely unrecognisable from, I think, 18 months ago, not because of me, but because of the time I've been working with Richard and talking about the work that the team have been doing. So I think there are things we will be able to tick off and say that's done now and that's the way we work, and we can forget about that because that's adopted and dealt with. But there will be a constant evolving growth within the service, and I think that's a really important point, that we don't go and think that the job will be done in 6 months or 12 months. I think there are key things that we will work on that we can tick off, but by and large this is a continuous improvement programme.
Right, brilliant, thank you very much for that. In that case, I think, in the absence of anybody else wishing to contribute, we'll call that quits there, and look forward to seeing you again. I think it's in 3 months or so, isn't it? See how things
January,
are going.
yes. Yeah.
In the meantime, Merry Christmas.
I think you have to be the first there, Chair.
Yeah, sorry about that. I feel like Tesco's in August. Right. Thank you both for coming along and having your sort of like toes set alight for the evening. It sounds like you're heading in the right direction. I'm hoping we can get to that point, but I take on board the point as well that it is going to be a constant evolution, and that it's that complacency being the enemy of progress, and hopefully we can overcome that and have a service that we can be rightly proud of sooner rather than later. But so thank you very much indeed, and thank you for staying so late with us. It's 8:30. I'm aware.
No, thank you for listening to me at this late.
No, it's always a pleasure.
I can always talk about planning, but
I think it's time for a beer.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much indeed.
Good night.
Yeah. Thanks, committee. Good night.
See you there, everyone.
Right. Final item on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying with us. We've lost one or two. Dave's given his apologies as to where he's had to go, so that's okay. I didn't think he was going to offer too much for the last item anyway, to be quite honest. Are we still? No, chorusy doesn't matter now, does it? Right, so it's our work programme. Mike?
I think I agree, Chair. It's time for a beer. We've got the item on November, which we've described as sorry, I'll go back to it. Police and Crime Commission. That isn't actually an item. That's just a note that we're meeting as the Police and Crime Committee in November because we're doing the enforcement item, which does mean that we have a single item agenda. We do have
quickly come in. Sorry, Mike. This is my lack of knowledge here. Do I still sit as chair, or does someone else come in as chair for that particular one?
No, you chair it. The only thing that we do is we invite the two members of the police, the West Yorkshire Police and Crime Committee. I can't remember its proper name. One of whom is Councillor Courtney, who shouldn't really participate because she's a member of cabinet and so shouldn't be involved in scrutiny. But she can come and be a guest. And I can't remember who the other member is. I think it's the Conservative.
It's Councillor Thornber.
Councillor Thornber. But we'll invite them and they'll join in the discussions, but it's just like a scrutiny meeting. But because enforcement is around the area of, in its broadest sense, community safety, we can count that as our annual meeting of the Police and Crime Committee. But it does mean that we've got some space on that agenda for one more item. We do have a petition that we may have to bring that was presented to council when you met as a council last week or the week before. But if members, I mean, it is a late time. Just to remind people, we didn't have a meeting in September because of the death of the Queen. So that's why we had 3 chunky items this time. Normally we'd only have two items and we'd have been finished by 8. So apologies for that, but it's because we didn't have a meeting in September. I suggest is anybody emails through to me and Bella if they want something to go on the November agenda, and I'll discuss that with Councillor Dickinson and Councillor Smith.
Smashing. I think therefore that concludes our business this evening. Were you wanting to have a chat with us afterwards anyway, Mike?
Am I alright to just quickly check something? Sorry.
Please.
I thought we had an item around the post-16 send transport policy and reviewing the impact of it. Or at least that was on the work programme at some point, because I thought it was for the next meeting, but I can't see it in the current work programme.
Let me take that away, Councillor Thompson. I do know there's a bit of an overlap with the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Board on that issue, but I will take that back and see where we are with that.
Audrey?
Yeah, we did ask for a review of it when I spoke. When it first went to cabinet, afterwards in place of sort of doing a call, and we discussed with officers that they would review it and do a report, and a proper report, including the impact on people that it actually affects. So yeah, I think Joe's right. It should be on the agenda somewhere.
Would the November one be too soon? I do remember this item being, and I can't remember when we discussed it. Would that have been a suitable period of time to have elapsed to have a look at it again?
I've got something. There's something at the back of my mind, Chair, that we have discussed this with the officers involved, and they wanted a little bit of time to get some statistics together. Right, so I will follow up on this, and I'll let all members of the board know what we're doing.
Joe, keep that one on the back burner for yourself, and bring it forward. Yeah, I don't want to discourage that.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's a confusing one because it's a place decision, but it has a lot of CYP impact, so that will also play into it. But yeah, it'd just be good to find out when we can discuss it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. Otherwise, sorry, Mike, did you say you wanted to have a word with Audrey and myself afterwards?
Oh, no, afterwards, as in another day.
Oh, okay then. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I just don't want this party to end. Right, in that case, ladies and gentlemen, folks, thank you very much indeed for your attendance. Thank you for your patience. It's been a long one. I hope it has been a rewarding one. I found this one particularly interesting. I do like this scrutiny panel. I get a lot out of it. And take care of yourselves. And unless there's anything else, we'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you.